Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give everybody a few minutes to get logged in, and then we'll get started. We're going to share some upcoming dates for other Frontiers learning opportunities on the screen. So feel free to take note of those and visit the Frontiers website to learn more.
Incoming call from Declan Research. Incoming call from Declan Research. Decline.
Are we ready to get started?
Our numbers are still ticking up pretty quickly, okay. So let's give folks just one more minute in case.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, I think we're starting to level out now if you wanted to get started.
Okay, so welcome everyone to Research and Discovery Grand Rounds. My name is Bridget Jones. I'm Professor of Pediatrics at Children's Mercy, and I co-lead Translational Workforce Development with Dr. Ed Ellerbeck. So today I'm happy to present our speaker, Ms. Ann Johnson, who comes to us from the FDA. So Ms. Johnson serves as the Director of the Office of Bioresearch Monitoring Operations, Eastern Division within the Office of Regulatory Affairs at the FDA. She directs field inspectional operations covering clinical and non-clinical research of medical products and foods, post-marketing, pharmacovigilance, and select pre-approval tobacco programs designed to ensure human subject protection, evaluate data quality and integrity in product approval applications, and assess industry conformance with laws and regulations. Ms. Johnson is a very active speaker on the speaking circuit. I was actually able to hear her at a recent conference for the Idea States Pediatric Clinical Trial Network, and she gave an excellent presentation. I think, well, I actually know the best presentation that I've seen given by FDA, and so it was very informative and just very practical, and helped kind of take some of the scariness out of the audit process, I thought. So I'm happy to have her here with us today to give a similar presentation. During the presentation, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. If we don't get to questions at the end, Ms. Johnson has graciously agreed to respond to your questions by email. So please still include your questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Johnson.
Thank you so very much for the invitation and also for the introduction. I have to say you started out by setting the bar high because we were in person in Crystal City, Virginia, and the whole dynamic is pretty different than when you're doing something like this virtually, but hopefully it'll be just as informative. So thank you again for the invitation, and I'm definitely pleased to join you all. I'm going to pause for just a minute so I can share my slides, and then we will get right into it. Okay. Somebody let me know that you're able to see that all right and that it's in the presentation mode where you can see the entire slide. Yes?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, my name is Ann Johnson, and I am currently working with FDA, specializing in the clinical research arena, and have been specialized in that area for about the last 7 or so years, but I am a career FDAer, so I've been with the agency for over 30 years in several different capacities, and this by far has been the most interesting area, especially after just getting through a pandemic where clinical research was at the forefront. We were, in the news. Everybody understood what research was. They understood phase 1s, phase 2s, phase 3 studies. And it was quite amazing to be able to go through that, one, to be able to survive it, but then for literally the world to understand the pivotal role that clinical research plays in medical product development and ultimately delivery to the patient. So it has been what I call a very interesting couple of years, but certainly has also propelled just the nature of clinical research and how it's conducted into things that we thought were in the future and were afar off. So with that, there are certain things that still stay the same, right? And those things are inspections. And the regulations have not changed. The expectations have not changed, even though the way we do things, the way we conduct clinical research may be evolving. So in our time together, I'm going to provide just a real quick overview of FDA, who we are and how we're organized, and then jump right into the topic of the day, which is inspections. What happens when an FDA inspection is coming, and some ideas and some ways to prepare for that, and also how to manage the inspection. So I hope to demystify that just a bit. And then based on the time that we have available, I'll touch on some of the key responsibilities for clinical investigators, especially the ones that we would hone in on in an on-site audit, and then end with at least some resources that you can take away with you for some of the hot topics that are happening in clinical research right now, as well as where to go for answers on our website. So we will jump right in, and I'm just going to start with what we regulate. And normally I give this as a story, and it's just a day in the life of Ann Johnson. Actually, it's my morning routine. And so when I wake up in the morning, I hop out of bed ready for a really good day. And the first thing that I do is I put on my glasses, because I do wear contacts, but I put on my glasses. And that's thing one. Actually, glasses are medical devices, and FDA regulates medical devices. Then usually it's my phone that has woken me up. So I might be turning off an alarm, check for text messages and what in the world is happening as far as news. Well, cell phones emit radiation, and FDA is charged with enforcing radiological health for the consuming public. So the cell phone has parts of it that are regulated by FDA. Then, I might head into the restroom and I wash my face with some sort of a cosmetic. FDA regulates cosmetics. But I will brush my teeth. And so now I'm using a toothbrush and also toothpaste. Toothbrushes are medical devices. If my toothpaste actually has a claim on it, such as prevents cavities, that's actually a drug. Then after that, I don my contact lenses after rinsing them in some saline. Well, there are 2 more medical devices. Then, I hop in a shower, and depending on the type of soap that I use, it might be something that, fixes skin conditions, etc. Therein, I might have a cosmetic, or it could be a drug. I hop out, ladies, well, gentlemen as well, we do our hair. We might have some gel in our hair, or maybe even some sort of a cream that helps to reduce, baldness or something like that. So now we're talking about a drug or a cosmetic, and I still haven't done my face yet. So I put on my eye makeup and a little bit of lipstick, and I'm ready to hit the ground running. I haven't even gotten out of my bedroom yet, and I've probably told you about maybe 15 different things that I have used that are regulated by FDA. Then I run downstairs, I greet my 2 little dogs, and I might feed them some pet food. FDA regulates pet food, so veterinary products. And then, of course, I may have, my favorite breakfast, which is like maybe cereal or something. And we regulate the majority of foods. There are some foods that are regulated by USDA, but FDA regulates the majority of all human and animal foods. And then I might take a vitamin, or I might have a prescription that I need to take. And so now we're into the pharmaceutical drugs or the dietary supplements. And the list just goes on and on and on. And that's just in my own home. So imagine your own morning routine. By the time you've pretty much gotten ready for work, whether you're teleworking or going into your car, you've touched about 20 to 25 things that FDA has some sort of regulatory authority over. Then there are some things that maybe not as obvious, right? So because we do regulate anything that emits radiation, think about if you're going to the airport and you're going through a scanner, or you're having a medical procedure done, and perhaps you're going to be getting an MRI or an X-ray. We regulate those pieces of equipment as well. And the list just goes on and on and on. So what does FDA regulate? Usually it's the question that I get, and I say a whole lot. If you want to put it in monetary terms, we regulate just about 25 cents of every dollar that is spent. So about 25% of the GDP for the United States is spent on something that FDA regulates. So our inspectional force, actually the way the world is now, FDA is global. We used to be a primarily a domestic organization, but now that industry is global, FDA is global as well. So essentially, we are regulating products without borders. There's precious little that is actually wholly contained, manufactured, grown, assembled, put together, including clinical research. Precious little is actually done within our own domestic borders. There is always some aspect of a process, of research, of manufacturing or assembly, where there's some component of that is done outside of the United States. Hence, our charge is global. And with that, FDA has international offices in Europe. We have them in Asia, India, and China, and also several offices in Guam and also South America. And that's basically because the world's entire supply chain is integrated. And at no time did that come more to the forefront than during the pandemic, when we had these barges that were literally sitting because we were all in this shelter-in-place posture. And we saw domestically what a disruption it was to things that we took for granted every day in the supermarket. So we are integrated globally. So FDA's mission, while it is based on the care of the American consumer, how we do what we do is global. So we do domestic inspections as well as international ones as well. So a little about how we are actually structured. FDA is run by a commissioner, and our commissioner is Dr. Robert Califf. He's the commissioner of FDA, and he's at the top. And then underneath him are, for operationally speaking, are these 7 different large components. So we have 6 specialized centers where a lot of the policy is made, any of the approval processes, if there is a product or an application that needs to be approved, the approvals happen at our product-specific centers, especially, and also any evaluations, so the scientific and research side of things. And so we have centers for biological drugs and devices. We have a center for pharmaceutical drugs. We have a center for medical devices and radiological health, one that covers food safety and applied nutrition. We have a center for tobacco products and a center for veterinary medicine. So those are the 6 product-specific, more specialized centers in FDA where we find a lot of these subject matter expertise when it comes to those particular products. The 7th is the office that I'm a part of, and that's the Office of Regulatory Affairs. Just as important as the others, but if you'll notice, it kind of spans all of the different product-specific centers, because in the Office of Regulatory Affairs, this is where all of the investigators are. So the folks that come knocking on your door, those are investigators, and they are out of the Office of Regulatory Affairs. And we do inspections for and in each one of these specialized commodity areas. So if we dig into the Office of Regulatory Affairs just a little bit more, bear with me as I just click all the way through this. We are Office of Regulatory Affairs is head by an Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs, affectionately termed the ACRA. And Carol Cave is our acting Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs. So she is essentially the top cop. She is the one that's in charge of the entire field force that conducts inspections. Then underneath Carol Cave, or the ACRA, we have 4 different assistant commissioners, one that covers just our import operations at the borders. Because again, we're global. There is so much that comes into the United States for domestic consumption that actually originates outside of our borders. So we have a commissioner that covers import operations. We have a commissioner that covers medical products and tobacco inspections. That's Elizabeth Miller here in the purple. And then underneath her, you'll notice that we have 5 different office directors, and they are specialized. So this one here that says OBIMO, that is my office. That's the Office of Bioresearch Monitoring. And Dr. Chrissy Cochran is our office director for OBIMO. And then we have biologics, medical devices, pharmaceutical quality, and tobacco. So that's the Office of Medical Products. And then we have an assistant commissioner that covers human and animal foods. That's Michael Rogers here in the orange with his 2 office directors. We split the country in half for each one of those because actually foods is the largest commodity by volume and by dollar and by consumption. So that's a fairly large program. And then we also have an assistant commissioner, Justin Green, who handles criminal investigations, and that's also across the board. So that's just a little about how we are organized. So as you can see, we're specialized, and then we're generalized, and then we're specialized again. So all of the investigators that would be coming out to do an inspection of any type of clinical research operation, whether it's a clinical investigator, a sponsor, an IRB, et cetera, they're all coming out of this office right here, OBIMO, Dr. Chrissy Cochran. I report to Dr. Cochran, and I run the Eastern Division, which is the eastern third of the United States. And then I have a colleague, Eric Pittman, who runs the western 2/3 of the United States. That's his travel area. Although it might sound a little inequitable, the work is actually cut in half. The majority of clinical research work that's happening in the United States is actually concentrated in the eastern seaboard, the eastern third of the United States. So how do we gather information? So now you know a little about our structure, the fact that we do regulate so much, but how does the agency actually get information? Well, the primary way is inspections, and that's really what we're going to delve into today. So for every single commodity area that we regulate is some sort of cadence or a periodic nature when we are going to go ahead and inspect. It is risk-based, it is risk-informed. So depending on the product and the process, an entity may have inspections more often or less often. So inspections are normally planned, but they also can be directed if there is a particular reason why we need to target a particular location, a particular application. Then, of course, there's information that we get from industry by way of applications and updates to those applications, or what we call supplements. Some products need pre-approval before they can be marketed, and we get that information in applications. Those go to our product-specific centers. Then we have a host of other areas. We collect samples, physical samples of anything that we regulate, whether it's foods or drugs or medical devices sometimes. And we have laboratories across the country, and they will analyze, and they will also give us information as far as here's what's in this sample, and they'll be able to tell us whether it's even being regulated appropriately. One of my favorite examples for this is dietary supplements. And so sometimes we'll get a particular dietary supplement that may be touted for, reducing, or it's good for your blood pressure. Doesn't say it reduces it, but it says it's good for your blood pressure. But we take that dietary supplement, we send it to the laboratory, and then we find out that instead of it just being the herbs that they claimed were on the label, instead now we find out, that it has lisinopril in it, or some undeclared drug that normally requires prescription and an approval. So sometimes our sample analyses may very well tell us, oh, here's something that we thought was a dietary supplement, or what it was according to the labeling, but after we've analyzed it, it really isn't. So we get data that way. There are times when we just have to go out and do some good old-fashioned investigations. Those are different than inspections. Investigations, we're trying to figure out what has happened. Something's going on. It's not routine. There's a complaint. There may be, let's say, a signal in consumer complaints or a signal in recalls. There could be sometimes, a disgruntled employee or a conscientious employee who may contact us, whether it's a center or in Office of Regulatory Affairs, and say, hey, there's something here that's not quite going on correctly. I've tried my best to make corrections from where I am in my particular position, but this is really important. Hey, FDA, we want you to look at it. We actually do get them that way as well. So just a variety of different ways to be able to gather information. So the ones that are on the left are primarily the ways that we intake information in the Office of Regulatory Affairs and FDA. And then the ones on the right are usually things that are reported to us. So adverse events, or there's a disaster or an accident that happens, natural disasters that may impact, let's say, our GLP facilities, where the animal testing happens. There's been a disaster in a particular area, and now everything that was on test, may be compromised. So we have various reportable registries, but those are some of the primary ways that we actually gather information, and it informs our risk analyses when we do inspections, when we might want to target sample collections, when do we need to do investigations, which may not necessarily be as planned. Now, delving right into the bioresearch monitoring operations, this is an agency-wide program because we have clinical research that touches every single one of those commodities, even foods, for food additives. So there's actually clinical research that's done on food additives. So in the bioresearch monitoring program for the agency, there are what we call three pillars that we have as objectives. The whole idea is to be able to propel access to safe and effective medical interventions, deliver them to the medical community, and to enhance the quality of the health of the consuming public. And how do we do that in OBIMO? Three things: to protect the rights, the safety, and the welfare of human research subjects. And history has taught us that, without these rights being protected, even well-intentioned science can run amok, and we tend not to treat our living donors of their bodies to science as people with rights, where we should first do no harm. We should make sure that they are fully informed about the fact that they're going to be a part of a particular research study. What are the pros and what are the cons? What are the things that we can't promise them? Will we take care of them even after they exit a particular study? We have to make sure that the rights of human subjects are being maintained and protected. So that's the first pillar, and that for us is number one. The second pillar is to actually make sure that the data that is generated during a clinical study or a clinical trial, that the integrity of it is sound, that it is reliable, so that when those product-specific centers are looking to make an agency decision as to whether this product can be approved, this product is approvable, but there's some additional information needed, or we are not going to approve this product, that they have the best data, the most reliable data that is available. So when our investigators go out, we are very heavily looking at data. They're very data review, authenticity of data heavy in their focus. And then the third prong is essentially we have regulations that cover clinical research, and it's to make sure that those regulations themselves are also being followed. So those are our three buckets when we look at the agency's objectives. So knowing that and knowing a little bit more about what we do, let's hop right into the topic about preparing for an inspection. So this is usually like the scary part. Nobody wants to hear, that FDA comes knocking at their door. So what should you do before FDA comes knocking at your door or giving you that phone call saying, hello, I'm going to be coming out? Well, the one thing I would say is know what we know. So we are very transparent in our expectations, what we're looking for during inspections, and all of this information is at your fingertips on the FDA website. But honestly, you could easily go to your favorite search engine, type in some of these keywords, and you'll probably find it a little bit faster. I'm not even all that well adept at navigating our website sometimes, but my favorite search engine will get me where I need to go. But essentially, for every single type of inspection that we do, we have a compliance program manual for literally every single one. And in these compliance program manuals, there will be the regulatory references that take you right to the regulations and the citations. It will tell you on the inspectional end, here's exactly what we're going to cover. And this is the guidance that we give to our investigators. So how to prepare for an inspection? Maybe just know what we're telling our folks to go out and look for. When you get these slides, which I will provide after this, these links are actually live links, and I did test them to make sure they still work, so they're still good. So in the event, that you'd like some of these links, no fear, you'll be able to have this after we're done here. So for every single inspection type, and you can see all these categories here, we have a compliance program. When you click on one of those links, and if you click on the OBIMO ones or the bioresearch monitoring ones, you will see all the different compliance programs that we have. So I figured the ones that might be most of interest to you would be the clinical investigators and sponsor investigators compliance program. And when you click on the link, you will see a document that comes up. The first page is on the right. And essentially, it will tell you up here at the top, this over, it'll tell you here at the top, this is for clinical investigators and sponsor investigators. So if you are a CI or an SI and you want to know, okay, what is FDA going to be doing when they come out to do an inspection? This is the compliance program for you. And essentially, it's broken down into 7 sections, which are on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And every single compliance program is just like this. So we have one for IRBs. We have one if you're involved in risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. We have one for that. We have one for bioavailability and bioequivalence, if you're into the generic work. But they're all organized by background, so you'll get a little bit of the history, the laws, and the regulations. Our implementation plan, which is basically FDA's posture for how we will plan for and conduct these inspections and what we will do with the information. The one part I want you to pay attention to is part 3. That's inspectional. Those are the instructions that we give to our investigators about what we feel is the most important thing to look for, or things or areas to evaluate during an inspection. So if you don't have enough time, let's say you get that phone call this afternoon right after this conversation that we're having, and the investigator says that they're coming out on Monday, just go straight to part 3. And that will tell you this is essentially what they're going to be looking for and what they're going to be evaluating. There are times when we actually do collect samples. And so this analytical section will tell you about the samples and also any regulatory or administrative follow-up. Basically, let's say an inspection ends up with some rather serious findings. This section 5 will kind of explain what that process is and actually what, some of the ramifications or potential actions could be. So again, this is more to be prepared to know this information before we even arrive. And then there's another particular reference called the Investigations Operations Manual. And chapter 5, it covers inspections. So again, and this is available right on the website. And I forgot to change this. We actually do have a 2023 version. This particular manual is updated every single year. And even online, a hard copy is every single year. Online, it's at least 2 or 3 times a year. It is an evolving document. But there is a subchapter just for bioresearch monitoring inspections, and it's chapter 5, section 10. And that has even more granular information about how we are instructing our investigators to do their inspections. So again, we're not here to do a gotcha. We want the work that you do to be usable by the agency and to be able to provide good access to the best drugs that are out there. And so there are no secrets. This is what we're looking for. And essentially by this, you'll be able to tell that these are the highlights. These are the problem points. And so therefore, these are the areas that we're going to cover to give our agency the assurance that the clinical trial or the study has been done in conformance with the regulations. So those are some of our references, but we don't stop there. We go a little bit further. And every single year, we issue what we call inspection metrics just for BIMO. So now the other programs don't necessarily have this. So you guys are the lucky ones because we do this every single year. And this is where we take a deep dive and do an analysis of the previous year's inspections and outcomes. And we look at what we are finding and where the trends are. This is available to you. And why is this useful? Wouldn't it be helpful to you to know what we were finding last year so that you can kind of target your attention to those areas in your particular areas, where you're working, your office, your institution, and say, hey, how are we doing in this particular area? Because FDA found a lot about this or this one particular issue, let's say a lot of informed consent issues last year. How are we doing? But we don't just go there with the metrics. We will actually, so this is where you can actually find the clinical investigator, the 43 observation trends. That's what the arrow is pointing to. But we actually broke that out into clinical investigators and also sponsors. And we're looking to have one for IRBs soon. But as you can imagine, this is a very labor-intensive type of analyses. But we're really trying to get to some of that granular information so that you can see the state of the industry based on the inspections that we've done. So this is what you'll find when you look through the biometrics. And so what you can see is this is actually our clinical inspections conducted. So it'll give you about a 6-year snapshot so you can see the trends for yourself and essentially how many inspections have we done. And so that's what this data shows. It also shows that, in 2020, 2021, we had a dip in certain program areas, and that was because of the pandemic. But it also shows you that when it came to biologics, there was an increase, and that's because of the vaccine work that we had to do. So this gives you a snapshot of the number of inspections that we did. This gives you a snapshot of how many of those inspections were green lights, as in no action indicated. So out of the inspections that we did last year, 408 of them, when they were classified or a final decision made, 408 of them were absolutely fine. There were no significant findings. 87 of them had some significant findings, but certainly not anything where the agency was going to take further action. And then 9 of them were actually official action indicated. which meant that a threshold had been crossed in the seriousness or the intentionality of the observations that we found, the violations that we found. And so the agency either had to issue a warning letter, we might have had to go down the route of even an untitled letter, disqualification procedures, et cetera. The majority of these are warning letters, but we have had some actions that have actually gone to court. You've probably seen what's been in the news in the last year or so from previous years' inspections, where, there are individuals now that are actually being prosecuted and found guilty for clinical trial, fraudulent or violative clinical trial conduct or lying to an investigator. We also, in those biometrics, and again, this is part of knowing what we know, we tell you what we found. And so for clinical investigators, this is what we found. These were like the top 6 or 7 areas that we found were challenges, and they were trends in the last year. So again, know what we know. That is the best way to prepare for an inspection. So ultimately, preparation is key. Having the appropriate knowledge, knowing what we know, the regulations, in our compliance programs, in the IOM, it will tell you the documentation that we'll be looking for. There are a couple of other areas that you can consider for preparing for an inspection. And that's making sure that your knowledge, that your knowledge transfer is robust. Excuse me, that you don't just have one person who knows the majority of the information, but that all study staff are trained and trained well. I always highlight here open communications, because sometimes what we find is we may inadvertently cause or create a culture where it's not okay to share our problem points, to share our pain points. There is no pristine clinical study. Every single one is going to have protocol deviations. You're going to have missed visits, missed endpoints. Life happens. So realizing that, we should always foster a culture where anyone that's a part of the study staff knows that they have the opportunity to say, hey, I'm seeing a problem here. Can we take a look at this? Can we look at how we can correct this? Because this doesn't seem to be in conformance with the protocol or with the regulations. So you always want to make sure you have that open atmosphere for being able to provide information or feedback as to where we might not be as good as we think we are here. Those are opportunities for improvement. And then, of course, mock audits or quality reviews that are done internally or even by external bodies or consultants that will do things like this can always be helpful. But always having those procedures as to how to handle an inspection, they're key, because guaranteed, in that purple box, knock, knock, the opportunity is going to come to test how well you are prepared. So let's talk now about the inspection and what to do when FDA calls. Now, the first thing I always say is don't panic, just don't panic. And sometimes it might not necessarily be you. It might be a person who's assigned to answer and take in initial phone calls. It's very important that they know who to call when the FDA calls to say that we're coming out. Sometimes the calls don't get routed appropriately, and then there's an undue delay, and then panic sort of sets in. So make sure your procedures have who should be notified when the FDA calls. And then encourage that person, whoever's fielding that initial call, grab pen and paper. You might not have enough time to type something, just grab pen and paper and mark your calendar. So the phone call that we make is not a phone call to schedule an inspection. It's actually what we call pre-announcing an inspection, and that's a little bit different. So we're not calling to say when it's good for you. We're saying we're going to be out in the next 2 to 3 days. And so it's a courtesy call so that we can make sure the right people have time to gather the right records and be available. Now, recognizing that quite a few PIs and CIs may also be practicing physicians, we do not expect for practicing physicians or anyone to be available 8 hours a day for the duration of an inspection. But it is going to be important on day one to be able to carve out at least about an hour to be able to have that conversation, whether it's in the morning, the afternoon, or even after later in the afternoon, even around like 3 or 4 o'clock. But it's going to be very important that that person, the clinical investigator, is available for us to issue a 482, which is our notice of inspection too. So we'll have that initial courtesy call. Like I said, do not panic. We are humans just like you are. We don't bite, we don't have horns, you know, we're not going to bang down any doors. We're professionals just like you are, and we both just have an important job to do, just slightly different roles when doing it. So you have this opening meeting, and this is normally, like I said, it will be with the clinical investigator, which is why we like to do that pre-announcement, to give everyone time to kind of adjust schedules, at least for this part. And so there are a couple of things that we have to do legally in order to conduct a legal inspection by law. One of them is to issue this form called an FDA 482. Most of the time, this is not an issue. Every once in a while, a person may be concerned that their name is being put on this form. That's just standard business. It doesn't mean that you are indicted, it just means like you are the individual, the person that we said we are here to do an inspection, and here's this notice, and the law requires us to give it to the most responsible person on site, which is usually the clinical investigator. The other thing that we also have to do is we have to issue credentials. We have to show you our ID. So we have the form and we have to show you our ID. And sometimes this is where it can get a little bit, scary, because it kind of feels like, like the cops are coming, because our credentials, I have mine with me, they kind of look like this. They look like, federal credentials. And some of us actually carry a badge or a shield. The badge and the shield, if you see it, don't be afraid. Like I shared with the group in Virginia, it's not for you. It's just that the way they give us this little holder that they have, that they give to us, our credentials are here like this, and then our badges are on the outside of it. But the badge is not for you. And I know sometimes that causes consternation. It causes, a little bit of worry. It's not for you. It's just that we have to carry them both at the same time, just in case of an emergency that requires us to use it. But these two things are required, right? So this is how we actually legally start the inspection. And we can't even start our line of questioning or gathering information or data before we do these two things. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is that at the top of the form, it will have the name and the address of the closest district office and a phone number. That way, if for some reason, you want to touch base with a manager or supervisor just to verify someone's identity, that is fine. It is so sad to say that there are times now when we have individuals that are literally impersonating investigators. Not cool. So if something seems a little untoward, we are not offended. We have trained our investigators to say it is not a problem for someone to verify your identity. The only thing is that you can't hold up the inspection because of it. So there's a little bit of a catch-22 there, but definitely the closest FDA office will be on that form. Okay. We talked about your name, the name of the firm, and the location. So we will fill all these out. And then at the bottom will be the name of the investigator, the FDA investigator, or investigators, because sometimes there may be a team inspection. And so anytime an investigator is showing up to do an inspection, it doesn't matter whether it's day 1 or we add someone on day 3. We will have to issue a new form because you are entitled to know who is there asking questions on behalf of the government. So while we're on site and during the inspection, a couple of things that will definitely help to smooth the way. Making sure that the right individuals are available. So if it's the study coordinator, who was a study coordinator at the time of that particular study was going on, that's one of the best folks to have there. But you want to make sure that the right people are there, and not necessarily just a person that's there just to write down answers and have to go somewhere else to write down questions, and go somewhere else to get the answers. We want to have access, and we need to have access to the individuals who are on site, who are knowledgeable about the study and even participated in delivering the conduct of the study. be accessible to answer questions and also to provide copies. And also we press, don't delay unnecessarily. If there's time that's needed to retrieve records, despite even a pre-announcement, explain that, but also expedite it. The longer it takes for us to get responses and the longer it takes for us to get records to be able to review, because remember, it's a data heavy review, the longer it takes for us to do that is the longer the inspection goes on. And I know nobody here wants an inspection to extend any longer by a minute or an hour than it has to. So here's the timeline is kind of in your court as far as how quickly you can get information to the investigator. And then you're also entitled to a daily wrap up. We have no surprises during FDA inspections. So at the end of an inspection, if there are a list of observations that we have, you should have heard about them during the inspection so that, again, there are no surprises. Now, if that ends up happening, you can feel free to reach out to myself or my colleague, Eric Pittman, because that is not the way we train our investigators to do inspections. We want you to know about the daily progress, any concerns or questions that we have that came up during the day, and also our plan for the following day. But the richness here is that if we have concerns or questions, and perhaps we didn't get all the information when we were looking for something, this is the opportunity to redress that, say, oh, we actually do have that document, or we actually did go ahead and confirm that particular, test result, and here's the information. Again, the whole idea is validity of the information. So we want to get as much from you as we possibly can. And sometimes reasonable minds may differ. We had a set of questions here, maybe one got missed. This is the opportunity at the end of each inspectional day to be able to get concerns and questions on both sides addressed. And I will say that, our investigators, like they're professionals. We train them to be professionals. So at no time, are we training them or telling them that the lines of questioning or even their conduct should be aggressive in any nature or hostile by any stretch of the imagination. This is to be a good professional exchange of information. We have a job to do on behalf of the government, but we're doing the job on the behalf of the government on the behalf of the consuming public, of which you and I are actually also members of the consuming public. So now we hop into the records that are needed. So essentially realize that by the time an investigator comes and they're knocking at the door to perform an inspection, usually that study is completed. It is very rare that we will come and do an inspection while a study is still ongoing, unless it's a fairly long study and we are coming in at certain endpoints to evaluate information. Or in the case of COVID, with the vaccines, the world could not wait for the studies to be done. And so we had concurrent parallel processes going in. As one particular time point or endpoint had been reached, we would come in and review that data and then go on to the next time period, next set of data, and review that. So sometimes exigent circumstances will interrupt that cadence, but recognize that by the time we're doing an inspection, usually that study is done. And so we're going to be looking for information that helps us reconstruct the study so that we can get the best insight into how it happened. And so a lot of this documentation is what's so important, because we're looking at it retrospectively. If it wasn't documented in our minds, it wasn't done. And that's why records are so important. So we will ask for these various types of records. We will ask for the protocols. We'll ask for your correspondence, your trial master files, or what they're called, your regulatory binders. We'll ask for that because we're looking for some of these key records to help us reconstruct the study as it was happening in real time. We'll ask for financial disclosure forms from clinical investigators, and we'll take a look at that 1572, the statement of the investigator, or if it's a medical device is the test object, then we're looking at the investigator's agreement. That's specific for devices. And then of course, case report forms. And this is independent as to whether they're hard copy or electronic. Some additional information that we will be looking for and asking for, medical records, if that's where some of the documentation for the clinical study is occurring, is being reported or pulled from, if that's where the raw data is. Will definitely be looking for source data. We will look at the control of the test article, receiving, preparing, storing, and also administration of the test article, and also reconciling inventory. We will evaluate the credentials of the clinical investigator and study staff as necessary. And we also will look at the list of studies that are being conducted by a particular clinical investigator at a particular time. And that gives us some insight as to the bandwidth, of how much do you have going on at that time. That's an important assessment as well as electronic records. What we'll be looking for in every single source data record or any case report forms, we'll be looking for what we call ALCOA. And that's just, these are the attributes that we're looking for in every record. Can we tell who created or first recorded that data? Is the data point, the end point, oh my goodness, the informed consent, is it legible and permanent? Is it, can it be overwritten? It should not be able to be overwritten without knowing what the original result was. Was it recorded contemporaneously? So, if we have somebody taking vitals at 8 a.m. in the morning, are we seeing records that have it being recorded, pretty much as it's happening? Or are we seeing everything entered into a system at the end of the day? That's not acceptable. We want to make sure that things are recorded as contemporaneously as possible. Are we looking at the true original data? In the hard copy world, we've seen where original data was on a Post-it. That's the source data. So we wouldn't want to know that that was transcribed into a record, because now you have an avenue for an introduction for error. But is that the original? Is that the first time it was recorded? We've seen people they're kind of writing it on their skin. I was like, well, how does that work? How do we go ahead and save that as data? That's not possible. So that's what we will be looking for. Sometimes we'll actually look in the trash, and if we see raw data in the trash, it may cause a question. And then also, is it accurate? If you're supposed to be going to 2 decimal points, two places beyond a decimal point, is it accurate? How are we rounding up? Are we rounding down? And is it complete? Is every single element that's needed for that particular record, is it filled out? These are the ALCOA attributes. And in any record that we're looking at, we'll be looking at those. I did touch on the predicate rule, on electronic records, and sometimes we get questions. So I included this here, but I'm not necessarily going to delve into it. But just recognize that all of the records, they could be hard copy, they could be electronic. If they are electronic records, there are some additional requirements, but the electronic records requirement is only for documents that we have a predicate rule for, so that that record is required somewhere else in the regulations. And if that record that's required somewhere else in the regulations happens to be electronic, then the electronic rule applies. But that's a whole topic in and of itself. But here are some examples of electronic records. And the thing is that if they are stored electronically, then our investigators will need access to them electronically as well. So the inspection at the end, so the investigator is looking through these records, they're asking questions. They might be looking at your audit trails, your electronic data. They might just be taking a look at how your office is organized, etc. And at the closing of the inspection now, we will want that most responsible person present again, which is normally the clinical investigator. And there will be an ending discussion. If we found no significant observations, there won't be any paperwork that's issued, and that will be that. But sometimes there may be some minor discussion items. And so we'll discuss minor discussion items. But if there is a form, it's called the FDA 483. If there is a form, it will be written and it'll look a little something like this. So it'll be written. So it'll have some of the same information up top, and then it will have observations that are listed at the bottom of the form. And so during this particular discussion, what's going to be really important is to make sure that you understand exactly what the observations are. Sometimes they're clear to us and they might not be clear to you. So make sure that the observations are clear. If there's any additional documentation that you had that was not reviewed, it was not provided during the inspection, you can mention that here, but it might not be, it might not result in us removing that observation, because now the inspection is closed. That's really an investigator call, our investigators call as to whether they'll remove it or not. Normally, we'll ask you to add that to your response to the 483. If you have a verbal response to the observations, those will be recorded and reported by the investigator, and it will be included in the inspection report that they write. At the very least, if you get a form 483 that has any observations on it, I always strongly recommend that you say you're going to respond in writing if you can. And I always recommend to respond in writing. Sorry, I have a little, there you go. Respond in writing within 15 business days. And the reason for that is, let's say that it is a very significant inspectional outcome, and the agency is looking at taking further corrective action, enforcement action even. If you get your response in within 15 working days to the agency, we will suspend our decision until we have reviewed your entire response. But you have to make the 15-day cutoff. After that, we will not suspend our decision-making process, and we will go ahead with whatever enforcement action we feel is necessary. And so that's why I always encourage, you won't necessarily know if we're going to take enforcement action or not. If you get a 483, submit a written response. It can only help, it cannot hurt. And here are some of the best ways to be able to craft your written response. Again, recommended, but not required, but recap the observation and describe, the corrective actions that you've taken, including timeframes. The centers like timeframes and documentation. Sometimes they'll deem a response inadequate if they don't have documentation and timeframes. So definitely include that. Consider if you had any other ongoing studies at that time, what the impact on those other ongoing studies might be. And then also, what about preventive actions? If there are things that you're going to put in place to prevent it from occurring in the future, what will those actions be? And those are some of the elements that we will be looking for in a written response. If you disagree with a particular observation, it is okay to put that in there. We are not retaliatory in nature. That is not what we're about. We want to make sure that we have all the information, and it is okay for you to disagree, but then provide an explanation as to why you disagree with that particular observation as well. So when the inspection is over, I always tell people, exhale, you made it. And the sun is still shining, and it's not the end of the world. When it comes time to send those responses, you'll be provided by the investigator one of two addresses. It's either going to come to me in BIMO East, or it's going to go to my colleague Eric Pittman in BIMO West. These are manned pretty much every single day, and it gives a good timestamp, so we'll know when we got your response. And then we take care of the internal dissemination of that response to all the necessary parties. And then at the end of the evaluation, the agency's evaluation, we come up with a final decision on that inspection. And I hinted on these earlier in the presentation. So really, the majority of our inspections are either NAI or VAI. Very small amount are OAI, but there are times when we do have to take some sort of action because of the nature of the conduct or the records that during the study. In most instances, if it's NAI or VAI, once we close it out, you will get a first-party purge of the report will be sent to the clinical investigator or the most responsible person that's on the forms. We won't send it to anybody else. If we do, we have to purge or redact more information. So, so for that reason, we'll send the first-party purge, which usually is, it's the entire report. We don't redact anything, but only to that most responsible person. If it's OAI, that might be delayed because we don't issue courtesy copies of the report until the case is closed. And usually a case is not closed until we've taken action and we've also fielded your response. So that's, and I realize we're coming up on time. My goodness, I cannot believe that an hour went so quickly. But that's the inspectional part of the of what I wanted to share. The remainder of the slides that I have, which again, I promised I would provide to you, touch on some key clinical investigator responsibilities. I'm just real quickly going to go to one particular slide that I want to, let's see. Training, because we're starting to issue notices of non-compliance. And so I wanted to just bring this to your attention. So clinicaltrials.gov was created back in 1997. And what it requires is that whenever there are regulated studies that are happening, they have to be posted on clinicaltrials.gov, and it's totally electronic. So it has to be posted there. And not only that, but certain information about who's conducting it and where those PIs are, and then also study endpoints, and also when the study has been completed, what the results are. This responsibility can be shared. It can be wholly the sponsor, but we do find sometimes that based on the agreement between sponsor and clinical investigator, that it's the clinical investigator that ends up being responsible for it. And so if when you are conducting clinical trials, it ends up that you have been designated as, you as a clinical investigator have been designated as the one to post information to clinicaltrials.gov, to make sure that you do so. Now, this is in our compliance program, and you can also just put this in your search engine. But if you're a clinical investigator, you have to have at least these 3 items in order to basically have the information to be compliant with this regulation. And the reason why I bring this one forward is we have quite a few notices of non-conformance that are happening. And we have a couple of cases which, unfortunately, if it's not corrected and the information is not posted, we may be going down a civil money penalties route. And we certainly don't want to do that. That's not what we're about. But this is very important data, and it is required. So I at least, wanted to go ahead and at least highlight that one. And then, like I said, a lot of this at the end, I put just because I thought it would be helpful to you all. And so there is one other slide I want to talk about real quickly. These are our guidances. So with the trend for digital health technologies, wearables, data that's transmitted from a patient's diary directly to some data warehouse where it's being collected, and also with decentralized trials, these are 2 really hot topics in clinical trials right now. And so we have 2 draft guidances, which I think will be very helpful to you, that really go into the agency's current thinking. These are not regulations. You don't have to do them, but this is the agency's current thinking on the evolution of clinical trials that are becoming more decentralized and depending more on digital health technologies while still being able to be in conformance with the regulations. So I highly recommend those as reads for you. And then if all of this is new and you're like, oh my gosh, I am so thrilled and I think I really want to get into clinical research, but can somebody give me just all the basics? Well, that October 2009 guidance is for you, is just kind of a starting point. And so, like I said, normally this is about 2.5 hours, but I wanted to at least give you the information here. And I will definitely share the slides with both Ashley and Bridget. So, so that is what I had for you today. If you want more, invite me back and I'll give you more. And I know we're out of time. I can hang out for a few minutes if there are any burning questions. I don't think I see too much in the chat though.
Yeah, well, thank you for the presentation, and again, just kind of the wealth of information. We will be sure to post those slides. We've obtained Ms. Johnson's permission to post these slides onto the Frontiers website, so you'll be able to access all of those resources there. So I don't see any questions in the chat, and I know, Ms. Johnson, you had a hard stop at 1 because you have another meeting.
Yes, I do. But again, thank you for the invitation. And like I said, take a look at the slides. I have some good information in there on, adverse event reporting and the deadlines for those. I have some good information in there on test article accountability and what we'll specifically be looking for there as well. So just, a lot of different tidbits for areas where I think you could find helpful. And I'm always here. So the terminal slide actually has my information on it as to how to contact me.
Thank you so much. We definitely appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
All right. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.